Ms. Hodge, before we get going with Mr. Brown, can I suggest a timetable, Mr. Enright, because part of it will involve you. We are going to hear from Mr. Brown and then have a summary of his wife's evidence read, as I believe. And then there's one further witness scheduled before lunch, which in the normal way of things would take us to, I don't know, maybe 11:30, quarter to 12. So I'm proposing that we have lunch whenever we finish, effectively, and start again at 1 o'clock, if that's okay. If your witnesses will be ready by this afternoon at 1 o'clock. And at a point, which is convenient to you, we understand that the remaining Scottish summary is now on the system, so that summary can be read. And if you would read 4 more of your choosing, then we will have a comparatively limited number to read in Belfast, and we're all on track, so to speak. So if everybody's happy with that, that's how we'll proceed. Good. Over to you, Ms. Hodge.
Good morning, Mr. Brown. I'm the usher, and I'm going to take you through the oath. I believe you have your Bible. Yeah, if you could hold it in your right hand, please, and just repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That the evidence I shall give.
That the evidence I shall give.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, Mr. Brown. My name is Catriona Hodge, as you know, and I ask questions on behalf of the inquiry. Please, can you state your full name?
Edward Brown.
You made a statement, Mr. Brown, on the 7th of February of this year. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Do you have a copy of that statement in front of you?
I have.
Please, could you turn to the final page of your statement? Do you see your signature there?
Yes, I do.
Have you read the statement again since it was first made?
Yes, I have.
Is the content true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes.
You worked as the Subpostmaster of the Cardonald Post Office on Paisley Road for approximately 21 years, is that right?
Yes.
Before you became a Subpostmaster, you'd worked in the fiberglass industry, is that correct? Yes. You were then later assisted your brother in running his newsagent, is that right? Where was that located?
Cardonald, just about 200 yards away from where the post office now stands.
For how long did you work with your brother in his newsagent?
Probably about 5 years.
Why did you decide to apply to become a Subpostmaster?
The opportunity came up and it seemed a good business.
In which year were you appointed?
Oh, well, we're going back to there. Hold on, see if I've got it here. I was only 19. It must have been... Sorry, I should have had that worked out.
That's okay. I think you've said February 1989. Does that sound correct?
That sounds right, sorry.
That's all right. Can you describe the branch?
It was, when we first took over, it was like a big hut. It was run down. We bought the land the hut was on, eventually knocked down the branch, built a couple of shop units, and the post offices went in temporary into one of the units, and I took it over temporary 28 years ago.
You ran the branch with your wife, is that right?
I ran it with my wife in the old hut, and then we moved to new premises.
How did you divide the work of running the branch between you?
She done the work. I done anything else. Really, she's a better accountant than me. So there was, at the very beginning, it was very labour intensive, and I've not got an attention span. So she really done the work, and I done what I had to do.
You've mentioned moving premises. When did that take place?
I think we were only in the old premises for under a year, probably 6 months.
When you moved premises, did you purchase the new branch?
No, it was a leasehold in the building.
What changes did you make to the premises when you took on the duties?
As I said, the old hut was on the land, and we knocked that down, built 5 units. Oh, my family built 5 units, and we put it temporarily so it's a brand new unit. So in there we had to fit it out, the slat wall, and we had to pay towards the bandit screen. If I'm right, it was about £20,000. So it was a nice shiny office to start with. And at that time, that was only at the beginning. The post office had been kind of reinvented. So it was a nice shiny office compared to what was available at that time.
What type of business did you run from the branch?
It was mainly post office. We did start to do stationery and some, but it was auxiliary. It was only really part of our service rather than a real business.
The Horizon system wasn't introduced until almost a decade after you were appointed. Is that right?
Yes.
How did you balance your business accounts in the years before Horizon?
It used to be on a Friday night. You had an old-fashioned ledger, and you put all the figures in, calculated at the end of the day. The difference between the two sides of your ledger is what you were short.
And can you please describe how your branch accounts were reconciled at the time with the post office accounts?
Well, you normally, you started off with an opening balance. You paid out money, you took in money, anything else out and in, and by the end of the day, they had to balance with the opening figure and the closing business against what you sold or what you didn't sell. Left you with a difference, and you were liable for that difference.
You've mentioned in your statement that as part of the balancing process, you would send paperwork to the post office accounts team in Chesterfield. Is that right?
Yeah, you used to send a big brown bag at one point with loads of all the duplicate bits of paper that you had ended up at Chesterfield.
When Horizon was introduced, that system came to an end.
That came to nil. Aye.
Do you recall when the Horizon system was first installed in your branch?
Yes, I was.
Forgive me.
At the time, I think it was either early 2000 or just 1999. It was not exactly the exact date.
Did you receive training from the post office when the Horizon system was first installed?
Yes, we went for 2 days in the piping centre in Glasgow. There was some units there that weren't online. They were working units, but not online. And they showed you what we thought was a fantastic system. It was going to save you all this time. And in theory, it looked as if it did save you all this time. But in the long run, it wasn't right.
Did you have an opportunity during your training to carry out a balance on Horizon?
No, it just showed you how to input transactions. And I don't even think we actually had a terminal each. It was like a kind of group session. So they really inputted the stuff, showed you how wonderful it was, and at the end the figures tallied, but we weren't actually doing anything.
Were you satisfied at the time with the quality of the classroom training you received?
I have to say yes, because before it was all new. It wasn't good, and they weren't any more than us. It looked fantastic, the system. It should have done what it said, but it didn't.
How confident did you feel using the system when it was first introduced?
Once again, computers were a new thing to everybody, so nobody was confident in using the computer itself. The system I thought was going to work, but it just didn't work. It just didn't work.
Did you receive any further training from the post office after Horizon was installed?
No, not really, no.
You've mentioned in your statement that some trainers came and attended your branch. Do you recall that?
I think I remember that. We were actually the busiest post office in Scotland at one point. So we used to have like 6 tellers. So we were quite important to the post office at that time. And I can remember them sending trainers. It wasn't usual for them to send trainers into the branch with it. And I'm sure we had 2. One, I can't remember the name, but I'm sure we had 2. But how long? I think it was only a day or maybe a half day.
Do you recall carrying out a balance whilst the trainers were with you in branch?
Yes.
Can you describe what happened, please?
Well, we got to the end of the night, and it was new to them as well, but they were good. But it was new to them, and they couldn't balance, so we spent more time trying to re-input the stuff, and they ended up with £100 shortage. What I thought was obscene at that time, and they thought was wonderful.
What efforts did your trainers make to try and help you get to the bottom of what caused that shortfall?
In hindsight, not a lot, but all we did was just keep redoing what we had already done in case we had done it wrong, and it still came to £100 short, so they didn't know how to fix it.
What were you told to do to resolve that discrepancy?
Simply write a cheque.
Is that what you did?
Yes.
How did you feel about paying money in to cover a shortfall which you could not explain?
Well, I was from a newsagent background. We don't have shortfalls, so £100 was, it was just, it can't happen, but it did. So I wasn't happy.
Had you experienced shortfalls and discrepancies when using your paper-based system?
Yes, but most of them you could either see that a teller's done something wrong, you done something wrong. You might never have got it back, but they had a bit of paper there, you could see where it went wrong. What made you feel a bit better, but you still had to put something in.
So you've described some classroom training and then some further training in branch for a day or two. Was that the extent of the training you received
Yes,
on
that was
Horizon?
it. That was it.
What other guidance did you have available to you to help navigate the system?
The helpline. We had I think we had an A4 binder, what was really like brain surgery. You looked at that, but there wasn't much of help. That was good for referring back to when the helpline was talking to you. But really it was the helpline that was your major assistance.
Did you continue to experience problems balancing your accounts after that first shortfall?
Yes, it became kind of normal. You could have periods where you had nothing, and then it became normal to have a shortage or
How
something like overage.
How frequently would you say these shortages arose?
Oh, it was a long time ago, but it became if you didn't have a reasonable shortfall every month, we're doing really well. Reasonable shortfall being in the hundreds.
What steps did you take to try to resolve yourself what had caused these shortfalls?
Well, at the beginning, you blamed yourself, so you were more accurate. You had people double checking what you had actually just done. You double checking other people's stuff. We put CCTV in, put the staff in. There was just nothing else you could do. We really thought it was down to ourselves because according to the post office it works, so it must work. So any mistakes were really ours.
You've mentioned contacting the helpline. Did they assist you to get to the bottom of what had caused these discrepancies?
But the helpline, as I say, we thought were good at the time, but I know for the fact, because I knew some of them on it, that they were counter staff that had just been introduced to the system as well. So they weren't any wiser than us. Helpful, but no real help.
What were you told by the helpline to do to resolve the shortfall?
It would depend on the case, but really a lot of time to roll over and something would come back, or make it good. Really, it was more make it good than roll over. Roll over was really if you could actually think you had something that might come back. They told you had to roll over the next morning or not open the branch. So most of the time it was roll over.
When you were told to make good the cash, did you accept their advice and pay the money in?
Yes.
Why did you do that?
Well, my belief is that in my contract was I was liable for anything between my opening balance and my closing balance, which seems fair if I make a mistake. But if it's not my mistake, I shouldn't be responsible for it.
And did you believe that you were responsible for it at the time?
Yes, I have to say we did. I believed that somebody was responsible. And could only be somebody in that building.
How did that affect your relationship with your staff at the time?
It put strains on it because everybody knew they were working with if you're working with a cash business, you know it's a wee bit harder because you have to have a certain type of mentality to it. But it made the staff apprehensive. It made us apprehensive.
You've explained that your wife Katrina was managing the branch, in effect.
Yes.
Did it affect your relationship with her?
It became strained at times because somebody has to be responsible. And if I'm not touching it, it's no my mistake. I'm only the one that's putting it in, but somebody has to get blamed, and we were blaming each other.
You've described on one occasion experiencing a shortfall of £9,000. Is that right?
Yes.
Do you recall when this apparent shortfall arose?
I couldn't put a date on it. That was that long ago.
Did you contact the helpline for assistance in relation to that significant shortfall?
Yes.
Did they help you get to the bottom of the discrepancy?
No, they said they would contact Chesterfield and contact their end units. Really, I'm not saying they didn't contact their end units with me, but there were no help to. But we were told to roll it over. So you believed if you had a small shortage, it went over the counter. £9,000 couldn't go over the counter in a mistake, so that had to come back in your mind at that point, but it never came back.
And what happened to that shortfall at the end of your trading period?
I think we carried it for 4 weeks, and then the post office set up a repayment out of salary. Over what period, I can't remember, but it was normally, I had to do that a few times, and normally it was over a year.
How much do you think you paid into the post office in total to make good shortfall shown by Horizon?
It's really, my accountant has worked out £85,000. It's 85 plus, but 85 that I can guarantee I've wrote off in accounts over the years.
You were using Horizon for approximately 15 years, is that right?
Yes, yes.
Your appointment came to an end in May 2015, is that right?
Yes.
You had been offered a leavers payment under the Network Transformation Programme, is that correct? Why did you decide to accept the offer of this payment?
It was getting a bit weary that we were the post office wasn't took over to make big bucks. It was a steady living, and we weren't getting a steady living out of it. It was hard work and a lot of responsibility for what you got out of it. So we decided to take it and run.
What was the effect on your personal finances of repeatedly making good shortfalls shown by the Horizon system?
Well, you done the out. It was as simple as that. You done the out. Things that didn't have to be done wasn't done.
Did you get into debt?
We got into debt. But we had to, at one point I took money against my house to pay, so the post office balanced. I think there was a couple of loans on the go at one point as well. The money from the post office had to get the money. But the long and short, if the post office didn't get the money, you didn't have a post office. Didn't have a post office, you didn't have a business that was sellable or viable.
Can you describe how the financial pressures you faced affected your standard of living?
We lived. That was about it. We went to work, we went home, and we went to work. There wasn't I'm not saying we didn't have a nice. We made it what it was, but we didn't have luxuries that probably should have had.
You've said in your statement there were times when money was so tight that you and your wife would visit your relatives in order to have a hot meal.
Before the inquiry, actually, you forgot about these times. They made you rethink it, how many times you went and visited people at certain times. Aye, we did.
Can you please describe what effect this hardship had on your mental health?
On my wife, probably worse than me. I'm quite good at getting on with things. But it made life harder.
Can you describe how she was affected?
She probably takes things on board more than me. I can shrug things off and get on with it tomorrow. Tomorrow's another day and I forgot about yesterday. She she was upset at the time, or upset that I wasn't getting things, because she would get things before I got things, and the kids would get things before we got things. But at times that was hard.
You said in your statement that running the branch and experiencing these shortfalls put a significant strain on your marriage. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
After your contract with the post office came to an end, you and your wife continued to run the newsagent, is that right?
Yes.
And you're still running that today, is that correct?
Yes, we are.
What effect did the loss of the post office have on the retail side of your business, your newsagent?
The newsagents is actually 3 doors away from the post office, so we've still got the line on the post office being 3 doors away, because that brings the people into the right side. But in the post office, it's our newsagents is still okay, but we know working the day-to-day in the post office is a wee bit different than the relationship we used to have when I was in daily into the post office.
What are your working hours like today?
I do about 115 hours a week, but that's the way it is. That's the way it is.
Is all of that in your newsagent, or do you have...
All of that is in the newsagents.
When you took on the post office, what had your hopes been for your retirement?
Well, everything was planned for 55. Because that just out of the blue, we picked that figure years ago. That's not going to happen. So it's had a knock-on effect. It really, but nothing to show for all the years.
You've just explained now the post office branch continued to operate, although you were no longer the Subpostmaster. Is that right?
Yes.
And you've explained in your statement that you've continued to experience some problems with the post office system. Can you describe that?
As I say, my wife would have been better at that one, but the post office is very slow to realise anything. So there's still problems with the lottery with the post office, and we've tried.
Do you have a terminal in your newsagent?
We have funny setup because we have the lottery in the newsagents. On a Wednesday night, the post office, they now balance on a Wednesday. On a Wednesday night, the post office shuts at 5:30. I take it their post office accounting system shuts. The computerised side it shuts down at 6 o'clock at night. We are still open to 7:30 at night. If we do a transaction at 7:30 at 27, that transaction is now took over into the next day. But according to the post office, they've finished all their accounts on the Wednesday night, 6:30. So it flings up errors if we do transactions. And they don't understand this. So you have to argue with the helpline every time. If you happen to have that transaction, they want to send you an error for the total of that transaction. You can easily explain there that it's in black and white what's happened, but they can't understand it. They just don't have the ability.
So do you find that you're continuing to have problems liaising with the helpline?
They continue to have problems.
Were you aware at the time that these shortfalls were occurring, that there were others like you who were affected by problems with Horizon?
No, say well before the internet, you were on your own unless you actually had a colleague that you were speaking to, or even going to the federation meetings where I feel they should have known more about it, because they were the hub, the 50 postmasters meeting together. They should have been able to pick up on these information. So you felt you were on your own because you were told it was only you that was making a jacksy of it. Everybody else was okay.
Who was telling you that you were the only one?
Well, the post office. When you phoned up, when you were having regular shortages, you went, it just can't be right. You're watching the tellers, you're watching the CCTV. It can't be right. And you were told everybody else is fine, it's only you.
When did you discover that others had been affected by failings in Horizon?
Oh, I think we read something in one of the papers at one point. and I made a call to the Federation. They still were very not taking sides at that point. I'm sure it was just something in the mail that when I realised, but how long ago, I don't know.
Have you taken any steps to obtain compensation from the post office?
I was in with part of the 555, but I believe they're still been exempt from joining the HSS at the moment, so no, I've not made any steps, apart from the original 555.
Did you receive some compensation when that litigation settled?
I received £8,000.
How do you now feel about the Horizon system and the treatment that you receive from the post office?
Now that I know that they knew about it, it doesn't seem fair. And unfortunately, I still think the post office has been special, even after what they've done, or they should have been special, because they're special to communities. But somebody has to take the blame, or somebody has to apologise, because it just wasn't fair.
There are no further questions that I'd like to ask you, Mr. Brown. Is there anything you would like to say on your behalf or on behalf of your wife?
I've got a closing statement that I've been practising, but right, okay.
Yes, please read it, Mr. Brown.
Thank you.
And am I right in thinking you're going to read something on behalf of your wife
I've got my wife's as well.
Good. Well, you do it in your own time and at your own pace. Okay.
My wife, I just got an hour ago, so.
Right.
Excuse me. Right. I would like to thank Sir Wayne Williams for an inquiry team for being so efficient. This has made life just that wee bit easier. It is my hope that the inquiry will not only financially compensate the sub-postmasters involved, but will go some way to act as closure for the pain, injustice and unfairness myself and many sub-postmasters were inflicted with. No financial compensation can replace the lost time with a young family, time with friends, but with time I am sure most will put any compensation to good use, repaying debts and making the memories lost. Once again, thank you for all your team involved in the inquiry. Thank you. That's my one.
Fine. Before you get on to your wife, can I just ask this question while it's in my mind? You told us, quite frankly, what you received by way of compensation. Did your wife receive a separate amount, or was that the amount between you?
No, that was the amount between us.
Fine. Thank you very much.
Okay. Right, I've got my wife. Right. She started it as if she's made her witness statement. So, moving forward from this, I would like to think that the post office will, at best, reimburse anyone affected by the mistakes they made. Maybe even apologise for their life ruined and severely disrupted by this miscarriage of justice. I think myself very fortunate in that myself, my marriage, my family and my business came through this, although I am angered at the fact that I can never be compensated for the family time lost, the holidays the children did not have, sorry about that. Family time lost, the holidays the children did not have, and the time we did not spend with them. Thank you very much to the inquiry team. Nice and short. Thank you.
Short and to the point, Mr. Brown.
Thank you.
So thank you for giving evidence to the inquiry. I'm sorry your wife hasn't felt able to do it, but will you pass on my good wishes to her?
I will. Thank you very much. Sorry again.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much, Mr. Brown.
Thank you very much.
Right, well, I think since that's a remote session, we'll have a short break to reconfigure ourselves, so to speak. So my colleagues and I will leave for 10 minutes. Yes, Ms. Hodge.
Thank you, sir. Our next witness is Mr. Chris Dawson.
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Dawson, as you know, my name is Catriona Hodge, and I ask questions on behalf of the inquiry. Please, can you state your full name?
It's Christopher John Dawson.
You made a statement to the inquiry on the 26th of January 2012. Is that 2022? Is that right?
That's correct.
Do you have a copy? Do you have a copy of that statement in
I
front
do,
of you?
yeah.
Could I ask you please to turn to the final page of your statement? Can you see your signature there?
No, I can't.
Have you had an opportunity to read the statement again since it was first made?
I've read through it a couple of times, and I'm happy enough with it.
Is the content true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
It is.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by asking you a few questions about your background.
Yep.
You moved to the Perthshire area when you were 19 years old, is that right?
That's correct, in 1993.
What did you do for a living before you took up the running of a post office branch in your local area?
When I first arrived up in Pitlochry, it was as a restaurant manager in one of the local hotels. I then went on to be assistant manager in another hotel.
Sorry, could I ask you to speak up a little bit?
Yes,
I think the air
certainly.
conditioning has just started.
I arrived in Pitlochry in 1993, initially as restaurant manager of one of the hotels. I then went on to be assistant manager at one of the other hotels, bars and restaurant manager in a further hotel, before going back to the second hotel as general manager. Then after the birth of my first daughter, the hours weren't conducive for family life, so I started working in retail up at the House of Brewer, just outside Blair Atholl, where I worked for a number of years, and then left and went over to help start up a his new business at the Courtyard in Kenmore.
Why did you later decide to apply to become a sub-postmaster?
I hadn't actually applied to become a sub-postmaster. Whilst I had worked at the House of Brewer and then on to Kenmore, the local councillor actually approached me, came to my house, said to me, "You've got a good background in retail, a good knowledge of it, you obviously know what sells. There's a good retail space in this post office. The current postmaster is looking to retire. Would you be interested?" Initially, I just thought, what do I know about post offices? But I was told kind of all the training would be given, etc. So I approached the bank and managed to secure a loan. And it basically went from there.
You were quite heavily involved in your local community at the time, is that right?
I was, yeah. I was a member of the Red Cross. We used to go out and do cover first aid for local events, Highland Games, cycling events, anything that was going on in the area. I was involved with the local branch of the SNP, and I was also master of the local Masonic Lodge.
And you've mentioned before you became a sub-postmaster you'd had one child. Were you married at the time?
Yeah, I was married in 1996.
And did you and your wife just have the one child?
No, we went on to have another one.
You were appointed, having applied, I assume, you were appointed as the sub-postmaster of the Pitlochry sub-post office in April 2007, is that
Yeah,
right?
just at Easter weekend.
How old were you then?
33.
Only 2 months later, you took on the Kinlochrannoch sub-post office as well, is that right?
I can't remember exactly if it was it was very quickly thereafter. Within 3 to 4 months, I was approached by a couple of representatives from the community up at Kinlochrannoch who hadn't had a post office for quite some time. They had a wee community restaurant, cafe, that they set aside a room for me. It was laid out with post office equipment, and they didn't want it run as a full-time operation. It's a small hamlet rather than a village, I would have said. So I agreed to take that on and just provide them with postal services a couple of days a week.
So in the Kinlochrannoch post office, you were effectively just operating from a retail premise is owned by someone else, is that?
Yeah.
And your Pitlochry post office, did you purchase that?
I had to purchase the leasehold from the goodwill of the business. The building itself had formerly been a Crown post office that was owned by the post office. They had then, for some unknown reason, sold the building to a private landlord and then rented it back at a huge amount of rent that was then, they agreed to that contract and then basically forced the postmaster to then also have to agree to it.
You mentioned purchasing the goodwill of the business. How much did you pay for that?
It was in the region of £25,000 plus some stock. I can't remember the exact amount.
Do you recall how you funded the purchase?
I had to remortgage my house.
Can you describe the type of business that you operated from your 2 branches?
Well, Pitlochry, I mean, it is basically the gateway to the Highlands. It's a very touristy town, a very busy town. Lots of coach parties, day trippers, as well as people heading up to Glenshee skiing in the winter. So yeah, I mean, it's a busy place. So I did stock it up with gifts, toys. A lot of people in Pitlochry who originate from Pitlochry had family members that lived in South Africa, Canada, Australia, New Zealand that had taken up the sort of £10 ticket back in the 60s. So you had a good mainstay of people coming in that were collecting their pensions, but whilst they were there, they were also buying the birthday cards for their grandkids that lived abroad, presents, parcels to post. So I stocked up with lots of nice, good quality kids' toys, cards, but also for the tourist market, designed my own label, incorporating the Pitlochry Dam on the label, and Pitlochry fudge, toffee, rock, the sort of usual tourist paraphernalia.
What kind of income were you bringing in from the post office and your retail business at the time?
The post office, the income was in the region of about 60,000 a year, which basically only paid the rent, the rates, and the electric. I mean, like I said, it was a huge amount of rent that the post office were charging us.
You said £33,000 a year.
£33,000 a year rent.
And £12,000 in
12, so I mean, it was £45,000 before you'd switched the light on. When you were getting paid 3 pence in the pound for selling stamps, I don't know how they ever expected anybody to be able to fund that, but that was what they'd agreed to with the private landlord. And then
you employed staff as well? Is that...
I did, yeah. I had probably about 6 staff, ranging between full and part-time, in the shop and in the post office.
You've mentioned your income from the post office. What were you able to earn on the retail side?
The retail side, the last year of trading was about 122,000, 61,000 of that being profit.
So it was a successful business?
Oh, it was very successful. It was doing extremely well, and I mean, it was only going to get busier and bigger.
When you took on the branch, you received 4 to 5 days of training.
4 days training.
4 days of training. Do you recall who provided that training?
I couldn't tell you the trainer's name.
Can you describe what your training covered?
Not a lot, to be perfectly honest. I took the keys to the premises on Good Friday, so it was a bank holiday long weekend. So between the Friday, Saturday, Sunday and Monday, obviously I had to get all my shelving units, stock, repair works done into the business. And as you can imagine, the busiest 2 days of the week for people coming in to collect their pensions. A lot of the local businesses, the woolen mills especially, and off licences, they used They banked with NatWest, the nearest branch being down in Perth, 25 miles away, but it is a partner of the post office, so they could do their business banking at the post office. So when I opened the doors on Tuesday, I had everybody in the town that was of pensionable age waiting for their pension. I had all these businesses. So my training consisted of, right, okay, start inputting that. It was probably the busiest day that they could have came to give me training, and it was not taken to the side or taken onto a side till and at a slow pace taken through it. It was mind-blowing. I mean, the amount of transactions that can be done on the Horizon system, and I knew nothing about them until the doors opened at 9 o'clock on that Tuesday morning. There was 3 of us behind the counter, plus the trainers. It was crowded, it was confusing. They were meant to be there to tell me how the system worked. And I basically sat there just giving out pensions and selling stamps, with no real knowledge of the computer.
Were you shown how to carry out a balance on the system?
At the end of the day, yeah, I mean, the previous postmaster had very kindly sort of said that he would stay on for a period of time, and his 2 sons who had worked for him, his eldest son in particular worked for me full time, his youngest son part time. So there was a wealth of experience already there, which, in all honesty, was to my advantage, because I didn't feel the training had been, so I was learning from them far more than I was learning from the trainers.
What did the previous sub-postmaster tell you about his experience of using Horizon?
He did warn me the computer system is not fit for purpose. It's already out of date. There had been rumours of people's having problems with them. So, I mean, I was sceptical of them. I'd never worked with computers before.
Did you yourself experience problems when using the Horizon system?
I didn't personally feel as if I was experiencing. I mean, occasionally you would be up £10, down 20 quid, down 50 quid. I mean, in all honesty, you were so busy, you just thought, if I've given somebody £20 too much extra in their pension, and you were having to make it good out the retail. A couple of times when you were sending money back, because it was a big cash holding post office, because you had all these businesses paying in their takings. So you were sending cash back every single week, sometimes twice a week, 25, 50, 75,000 pounds at a time. Now you were counting £1,000 into the little cash bags, sealing them, signing them, initialing them. And a few times it came back, oh, there was only £980 in that envelope, or there was only £950 in that envelope of 50s. And you just had to believe them. I mean, I phoned up a couple of times querying it, and oh no, well, you have to make it good, your signature's on it.
In terms of making good shortfalls, how much do you think you paid?
I never ever once kept a note of it. I mean, you were balancing every day, and you could be up 10 pence one day, down 9 pence the next. I mean, on the wee shelf behind my seat, I kept a cup. If I was up 10 pence one day, it went into the cup. If I was down 9 pence the next day, it came out of the cup. When it was larger sums, I took it out of the retail side. But never kept any records of it. I mean, it happened certainly, definitely more than once. I wouldn't say it happened every week.
You've mentioned in your statement a shortfall of cash occurring when one of your staff members made an error in particular seat.
The Horizon keyboard, unlike most keyboards, had a 00 on it. So it was one of the businesses, it was one of the local off-licences, Threshers, had come in to do their banking from the weekend, and it was £4,200, give or take, whatever. Unfortunately, the double zero had been hit instead of the single zero, so it had been inputted into the system as 42,000 rather than 4,200, which left me with a obvious shortfall of 37,800.
So Horizon had recorded, in effect.
We identified that at the end of the night. I mean, we were able to pinpoint it straight away. Went and checked it with the off licence, on their receipt. So it was easily identified. We phoned it up. We reported it. It was logged. We were told it would take about 6 weeks to rectify itself, which I found very strange. I mean, why would it take 6 weeks? I mean, surely it could have been rectified the next day or at their end of month balance. 6 weeks just seemed quite strange to me, but that's the way it was.
Was the error successfully rectified by the post office?
After about 6 weeks or so, I suddenly wasn't 38,000 short, I was 17,500 short. And I was by this time I had become quite annoyed, disillusioned with post office as a organisation and as a body. I was I've not even sorted it right. So, it'll sort itself out in a few weeks.
Did you notify the post office that this shortfall remained?
I hadn't notified them that shortfall was there because I assumed that it was part of the original shortfall, and I had already reported that.
What did you do when it became apparent that that shortfall wasn't going to rectify itself?
Well, obviously, because I had been saying that, inputting it, that everything was right, because I was just waiting on them rectifying it. I became quite worried. I knew that I was responsible for the money. And when it became apparent after a few months that this isn't going to rectify itself, I made the decision to just start paying it back in myself. £500 a month, whatever I could afford, to pay it back, to make it right, because at the end of the day it wasn't my money.
You've explained in your statement that your branch was audited at some point in the summer of 2009. Is that right?
The auditors arrived. They were there prior to my arrival.
Sorry, before we go there, can I just ask you about something which you say at paragraph 17 of your statement? Because you talk about the post office actually sending you a memo that the 37,000 had been corrected. And I just want to understand this. My understanding of your statement was that on the one hand you get a memo from the post office saying the 37,000 has been corrected, but on the other, Horizon is still showing a 17,000 shortfall.
Yeah.
Have I got that right?
Yes.
Right, fine. So the two are not consistent, obviously, and I just wanted to be clear.
Very little was consistent.
Right, fine. Okay, thanks. Sorry, miss.
Not at all. We were talking about the audit of your branch in the summer of 2009. At that stage, the shortfall was still showing on your accounts.
It was, yeah.
Were you present at the branch when the audit was carried out?
I was present when they started it. They were there prior to my arrival. I had to go in. They wanted entry to the building even before me. I was like, well, I have to go and switch off the alarms. You just have to wait there for a minute. So I let them in. They put a closed sign up on the front door. I wasn't allowed to open the doors, which obviously wasn't good for local business anyway. Once the audit had been conducted, I was told I was suspended. I was no longer allowed to come behind the post office counter. And I had to hand my keys back in to my staff, who were still allowed to.
Were you shown any of the records on which the auditors relied when carrying out their audit?
I don't remember seeing any record. I actually don't even remember signing anything. I knew that the shortfall was there, and I just basically had to say, right, yeah, I know there was a shortfall.
At the time of your suspension, what did you understand the Post Office's intentions to be in terms of getting to the bottom of this figure of £17,000?
I mean, I understood, and I mean, you've got a core belief that something that size and an organisation that size are going to conduct a full audit. I mean, because it was a computer system, there was no paper trail. So, I mean, I'd tried looking for it to see if there had been another input error, or if it was related to the original, or whatever. At no time did I think that anybody had taken the money. They had all worked for post office counters for years. I thought they would conduct a full inquiry, an investigation and an audit, and that the money would be found.
Is that what happened?
No. I was told that fraud officers from Post Office Limited would be coming to my house, which they duly did, and basically just accused me of taking it.
When you were told that you were going to be interviewed, did you try and obtain any advice or legal representation?
Yeah, I phoned up the Federation of Subpostmasters, who were little or no help at all. Basically, the advice was just admit it and pay it, and you'll be able to trade again. I got the real impression that because they were all postmasters themselves or worked for post office, I got the impression that they actually feared for their own jobs if they gave you other advice, that they were just puppets. So yeah, I mean, the advice was no good to me at all.
You were interviewed under caution, is that right?
I was, yeah.
Where did the interview take place?
In my own house, which again I found very strange, very intimidating, very scary, to be perfectly honest.
Do you recall when the interview took place?
I don't remember the date. What I do remember is the doorbell going, and two, I'm not going to refer to them as gentlemen because they just were two big, burly, I mean, they could have been wrestlers by the size of them. Black suits, black tie, came into the door, told me who they were from, that I was going to be interviewed under caution. I had been advised that I was going to be interviewed under caution, and I had asked, okay, right, can I have a lawyer present? No. You can have somebody who works for the post office, so I could have had the local mailman with me, but I wasn't allowed a solicitor. And I said to him at the time, I was like, well, will I receive a copy of this interview? Oh yes, you'll receive a copy. I was like, and then I can take that to a solicitor. That's up to you. The two men came into my house. I mean, they wanted to go through, they went through my bank accounts, business and personal, joint. They were looking in cover. I mean, they basically, the first words that came out their mouth when they sat down is, so where's the money?
Before we get to that, because it's dawned on me that there may be differences in the Scottish criminal law to the English and Welsh criminal law. So when you say that you were interviewed under caution, am I right in understanding that the first thing that would have happened is that you were told words along the lines of, you don't have to say anything?
No.
No, I see.
I wasn't told that at all.
So what did you understand they meant by the phrase interview under caution?
My understanding of interview under caution is that a record will be taken, passed on to police, procurator, fiscals, CPS, whomever, for an investigation to take out. The fact that I was denied a lawyer, I queried right from the get-go.
Carry on, if No, I'm sorry, but it struck me belatedly yesterday in a discussion with my colleagues that I need to know what the phrase interview under caution might mean to a Scottish lawyer or a Scottish layperson, that's all.
And so
Thanks.
I think what you said is you understood it would be a recorded interview. Is that
It was, yes. A tape recording device was set up on my living room table. The two of them sat at one side of the table, I sat at the other, the tape recorder in the middle. It was a twin cassette. They did open up two packages in front of me and place blank cassettes in, just the wee mini cassettes. And from there, it was just, it wasn't an interview. I mean, my understanding would be that an interview under caution, an investigation, whatever you want to call it, is that they have to look for evidence. They basically just come in and went, where's the money? There was no presumption of innocence. It was an automatic presumption of guilt. And it was horrifying. I mean, the minute they started, I felt as if my back was on the wall. And there was two of them, like I said, they were large men. And it was just horrible. It was repeated. So what did you do with the money? Where's the money? Have you hidden the money? Have you given the money to somebody else? Where's the money? And this just went on. I mean, there was no questions. It was just baiting and badgering for the entire time. And after a period of time, I think possibly about half an hour, I turned round and I just said, right, wait a minute here. I was like, I had £998,000 in my safe that day. I was like, do you think I would have been messing about with 17 and a half? I was like, if I was going to steal, I would surely have taken the lot and I wouldn't be sitting here answering questions. I'd be in the Caribbean. To which the reply came, all right, so you've thought about it. Where's the £17,500? Give up. I was going nowhere with it.
So if I've understood you rightly, it was clear to you that by this point you were being treated as you were under suspicion for having stolen the money, is that?
I don't even think I was under suspicion. I was assumed guilty.
What were you advised to do when your interview concluded?
When the interview concluded, I turned round and I said to them, I was like, right, can I have my copy of the tape? It'll be forwarded to you. To this day, 12 years on, never received it.
And what happened? What were you told to do in relation to the shortfall?
I was told basically it was my responsibility. It was in my contract. I had to pay it.
Did you agree to pay the sum?
No, I said to them, I was like, I know that this is a computer error. I was like, I've heard about other computer errors. And they insisted, no, this is just your office. You're short of money. You're responsible. This isn't happening anywhere. There's no computer problem. And I knew that I'd read about it. But it was basically, you'll be hearing from us soon. And every time I phoned, because I was phoning initially daily and then weekly, just sort of saying, how's the investigation going? How's the investigation? Because I was suspended, but I was still having to pay the rent and the rates and the wages. They brought in some postmaster from further up north, who was reaping the rewards, getting paid from the post office in some of the busiest months, a very good wage, whilst I was receiving nothing except from my shop income. I was allowed to still enter my shop, but I wasn't allowed to enter the post office. Now, in a town the size of Pitlochry, 3,500 people, the rumour mill had started the minute that the close sign went up. So I had to stand there in the front of my shop with people looking at me, whispering, asking me outright, some of them, how come you're not behind the post office? It was just a horrible situation.
For how long were you suspended from your role as a sub-postmaster?
Before I eventually resigned, 6, maybe 7 months, I couldn't carry on financially. I mean, I had, for the first few months, even though I was receiving no income from the post office, I was still expected to pay that £33,000 a year rent, £12,000 a year rates, to pay the electric bill. Eventually argued the point in post office themselves, rather than charging the other postmaster that they'd installed. He paid the wages, but post office, I believe, paid the rent and rates. So whoever that gentleman was made a tidy sum out of it, because he wasn't liable for the things that I was liable for. But because I'd had to pay them for the first few months, I mean, my savings were gone. And eventually, I think it was in the January, just said enough's enough and emptied the shop, and had to seek advice on bankruptcy.
Were you made bankrupt?
Yeah, I was made insolvent, I think it was around about the March, April.
And that was shortly after you'd resigned in January 2010.
I mean, just prior to me resigning, and I think it was the final nail in the coffin for me, I had again phoned up and asked, look, how's the investigation going? The reply I got was, we know it wasn't you, but you still have to pay it. It's in your contract. I was like, well, if it wasn't me, and you're saying it's not the computer, it must have been somebody. Are you investigating anybody else? No. And that was basically the end of the conversation. And that to me was just, right, so they want me to pay this money, even though I never took it. They know I never took it. They've admitted I never took it. But they want me to pay it. I'm not doing it.
Do you recall who you spoke to at the time?
It was just some faceless person on the end of the phone. I mean, the helplines were, it's the biggest oxymoron ever, helpline.
Did you attempt to sell the business after you resigned?
I did try and sell, but obviously, because my bankruptcy was looming, I wasn't able to sign it. So, I mean, they then sold the building. Now, I mean, all the fixtures and fittings that I had paid for, along with the goodwill, bulletproof glass, counters, etc., etc., all of that got sold off as well. The buildings, the bulletproof glass, I've got no idea how much the initial cost of it was, because it was put in prior to me taking over. But I know it certainly wasn't cheap, and I mean, that was basically just ripped out and thrown in a skip. But at the end of the day, it was still mine.
What did you hope to achieve from your business before you felt forced to resign?
Having looked into the post office, and I mean, going by advice, I mean, it's a big institution. It's been around for hundreds of years, and I had seen the model that some other people had used, take on one post office and then after a year or so take on another one, and I knew that some of the other local postmasters were either getting to retirement age or getting to an age where they just wanted to say, right, enough's enough. So the long-term plan was to take over the post offices in the neighbouring villages, etc. Obviously, that never happened.
Have you made any attempt to estimate what you think you would have earned had you been able to carry on as you had planned?
Well, during the first court case with Freeths. One of the initial conversations had been the fact that I was 36 years old when this happened to me. The current retirement age being 67, so that was 31 years of lost income. Basing that on the post office wage from 2009, 2010 and the shop profits from the same period, not including inflation or interest, it was they estimated that I had lost 2.97 million.
What did you in fact recover from the settlement of the group litigation?
Sorry?
What did you in fact recover from the settlement of the group litigation?
I mean, negligible. I mean, the fact that the first case again was just how it was dealt with, how the settlement was dealt with, the fact that post office didn't have to pay the legal fees, that it was all swallowed up in legal fees, and the 555 received virtually nothing. I received absolutely no satisfaction from that whatsoever.
Did you receive some compensation?
Very, very small amount.
How did the loss of your post office salary affect your personal finances?
Well, like I said, I've already been paying the rent and rates just for a couple of months without having the post office salary, so it left me in a state that, as I mentioned, I had to declare myself bankrupt. I could no longer afford to pay my mortgage.
You lost your home.
My home was repossessed, yeah.
What about your other possessions? Your car?
Yeah, I couldn't afford to pay the car. And then after a few months, I mean, I don't believe for a second that any marriage could have coped with that amount of stress. I mean, I was a complete mess. Withdrew into myself. I was very paranoid that people were talking about me. So the marriage collapsed as well, and I ended up moving out. The bank allowed, because of our kids, the bank allowed my ex-wife to stay in the house for a wee while until she was rehomed, but the house was eventually repossessed.
What did you do for a living after the termination of your contract as a sub-postmaster?
Well, for the first year, because of the terms of my bankruptcy, I wasn't able to work at all. I then ended up taking jobs, washing dishes. I mean, at the end of the day, I was still living in Pitlochry. A lot of the people had an assumption of guilt because would they believe me or would they believe a 300-year-old organisation? So getting a job, especially a job working with money, hotel management, retail, which had been my background, no, that wasn't happening. So I ended up washing dishes, working as a kitchen porter. One of the other local businessmen that was a good friend and had every faith in me did give me a chance. He trusted me. So I was working front of house in his restaurant, in Drummond's restaurant in Pitlochry.
What do you do now for a living?
I'm self-employed as a care at home provider, providing care for the elderly and infirmed in their community in their own homes.
You've mentioned already you and your wife have 2 children.
We've got 2 daughters.
How was your relationship with your daughters affected whilst you experienced this financial hardship?
The girls have never ever complained. I've never made any. But I personally feel horrible. As a father, couldn't properly provide.
Don't worry, Mr. Dawson. We've got plenty of time. You just take it easy.
A father should be able to provide for his kids, and for a long period, I couldn't. Like I said, they never complained. Even at Christmas and birthdays, when what I was able to give them was what you would throw into a charitable. Just made you feel like a failure.
How was your mental health affected at the time by these difficulties?
Yeah, was very badly depressed. I didn't realise at the time. Others around me were saying you need to go to a doctor. You're obviously depressed. I didn't think there was anything wrong with me. Looking back now, I mean, I was just a disaster. I felt paranoid. I felt people were speaking about me. I had a fear of leaving the house. When I did leave the house, it would be at night time and dark. I didn't feel as if I was myself. A shadow of myself.
You had previously aspired to go into local politics, is that right?
I had been approached about standing for council, but it was the councillor that had approached me had unfortunately passed away untimely, and I was approached, would you be interested in standing? But I mean, I'd literally just taken on a big post office, and I'd already taken on the Rannoch post office at that point. So I declined at that time. Said, well, it might be something that I'm interested in the future. Maybe once I'd established the businesses and could step away from the day to day. It would have been something that I would have really enjoyed, really liked to do, put something back into the community.
What were the prospects of you entering local politics after what had happened with the short?
Who's going to trust or vote for somebody who's been accused of stealing? Although I was never ever charged, the doubt was always there. I wouldn't have voted for me. There was no chance.
How would you describe your current circumstances, Mr. Dawson?
Yeah, I mean, like I say, I'm self-employed, myself and my partner, my fiancée. We've got a relatively good income. It's a job we both enjoy. We go to the same clients every day at the same time every day, which, unlike a lot of care organisations, it's more hectic. We like to run it so that people with dementia, people with Alzheimer's and what have you, they need continuity. So we meet with them and their families prior to them coming on board with us. And we say, okay, we will be here at X time every single day. And give or take 5 minutes allowing for traffic, but that's explained to them. that's exactly what we do.
And how is the current state of your mental health?
Better. I still think about it every day. I mean, there's not a day goes past that you don't go past a postie. You don't go past a Royal Mail van. You don't pass a red pillar box. And it's almost just right there.
Looking back on your experience with the post office, how do you now feel about the way you were treated?
Excuse me just a second. Looking back on it now and knowing what I know now about the fact that they knew all along, knowing that from the very beginning Fujitsu was identified as having issues on the Horizon system, finding out that of the 11 tenders to put in an IT system that they came 6th, finding out that even though they knew that it was this Horizon system, they then went on to spend £300 million of taxpayers' money to try and tell us no, it wasn't as it was usual all along. I'm disgusted. Sorry.
Please don't apologise. I've no further questions that I would like to ask you. Is there anything you'd like to say that we haven't covered in your questions?
In the questions, no, not really. I mean, there's just a few comments I would like to direct, if that was okay.
Of course, yeah.
Sorry, I never brought my reading glasses. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Sir Wynne, for inviting me along today. And I do have a few questions that I'd like to ask. Given the length of time that has passed and the lives and reputations that have been ruined since it became apparent that the Horizon system was not fit for purpose, why did Post Office Limited continue to pursue innocent postmasters and mistresses? Who sanctioned the £300 million in legal costs for Post Office to fight us to a standstill on the civil claim, to stop us from getting the full truth? I don't for a minute believe that this was just a pen pusher or a bureaucrat that sanctioned this. I don't even think it's within the remit of the head of Post Office Limited. I think this has to reach the government level, be it the Business Secretary, the Chancellor, maybe even as high as number 10. For that amount of public money to have been used to protect an asset whose sole shareholder is the Westminster government, somebody within that government knew. You and the people in this room may think that everyone knows about the problems with Horizon, but they don't. 2 weeks ago, I was in at the local post office and I mentioned the current problems with the Horizon system and was she following it? She had absolutely no idea what I was talking about. She didn't know that there was a problem with Horizon. She didn't know there was an investigation. So why have Post Office Limited not contacted every single sub-postmaster and mistress, both current and retired, to inform them of the problems with the Horizon system and invited them to submit requests for reimbursement for any and all shortfalls since the introduction of Horizon? Why, when the truth is known by all parties, is compensation being withheld? Why has the scope of the compensation not been broadened to include those like myself who refused to admit to something they hadn't done, people like me who pleaded their innocence. Those who were not formally charged or jailed, but were threatened with it, threatened with prosecution. And we've lived in fear of a knock at the door for years. How many more innocent people have to continue to suffer? How many more need to die before they're properly vindicated and compensated? I feel that the national news coverage of the Horizon case has at best been woeful. The perfect example, Panorama a few weeks ago, week past Monday. Fantastic piece of journalism. The next day in the newspapers, not a follow-up. It's as if people either, and why was it showing at 10:40? Panorama's always showing at 9 o'clock. It's almost as if they don't want people to know about it. I want to see a formal and full apology from all those involved in this scandal, published in all the local newspapers and magazines in the areas with sub-postmasters and ministries involved. Not just in a broadsheet buried at the back of a page for only a minority to read. I mean, in my case, it affected me in Pitlochry and the surrounding areas. So I want to see that apology in the Pitlochry News. I don't want to see it in the Financial Times. The apology needs to be seen and heard by the communities that it affected. Lastly, I want to see Paul Reynolds, amongst other senior officials, feel the full weight of the law in a similar manner that it was so eagerly dealt out as judge, jury and executioner, whilst in full knowledge that those who were prosecuting were innocent. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Dawson. Clearly, you've spoken about very personal and difficult matters in a public forum, and that's very difficult. So I appreciate you taking the time and the trouble and making the effort to come and give this evidence.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Right, well, I think we can have a mid-morning break. And in that mid-morning break, Mr. Enright, can I invite you to discuss with your clients, remaining clients, how they would like to proceed? I don't want them waiting around for hours if they prefer to get on with it, so to speak. So let's have a 15-minute break and then take stock of where we are. Whenever you're ready, Mr. Beer.
Thank you, sir. I think Mr. Enright's indicated that his clients are very content to continue now.
Excellent.
And so can I ask for Donald McLean to be sworn, please?
Could you please stand and repeat after me? I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Good morning, Mr. McLean. Do take a seat.
Good morning.
My name is Jason Beer, and I ask questions on behalf of the inquiry. Can you give us your full name, please?
Donald Roger McLean.
Thank you. In front of you is a copy of your witness statement.
Yes.
If you turn to the last page, you should see it's dated the 20th of January 2022.
Correct.
And is there a signature there that's
Yes.
yours? And are the contents of that witness statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes.
Thank you. Can you tell us a little bit about you, please? How old are you?
I'm now 70.
Okay.
I've been a sub-postmaster for nearly 25 years. I actually retire tomorrow. I hand the keys over to the office I've been running temporarily tomorrow. Before that, I originally went to sea as a radio electronics officer.
We're going to come to your background in a minute. Are you a married man?
Yes, my wife is.
Mrs. McLean is there.
Yeah,
And I don't think you've got children, is that right?
correct.
Now, no need to tell us at which post office you're currently a temporary sub-postmaster, but until tomorrow you are a temporary sub-postmaster.
Yes.
And before you became a sub-postmaster, I think you were about to tell me what you did. I read you had an interesting and varied career.
Yeah.
Tell us about it, please.
And don't forget the Cardiff bit.
Yes, okay. I went to, I trained to be a radio stroke electronics officer and went to sea and I spent probably 6 years there. I was brought up by a great aunt and uncle that were showing out, so I came ashore and I went to university in Cardiff.
Okay.
And I was there, and during that period my great aunt and uncle died, and I got a job, and we went working for British Aerospace on the maintenance operation of Rapier defence missiles, on the basis of working out in Oman to maintain the systems. But before I was just about to go out, I got headhunted by a big cruise company now, Carnival Cruise Line, but then they were a very small company, and I went to work for them on a brand new ship that was coming out of Denmark. From there, after the time I came ashore, I became a technician at South Glamorgan Institute for Higher Education in Cardiff.
Yes.
And there I went into teaching, and I moved up to South Tyneside College, which was one of the major providers of marine education in the country. And I worked in the electrical and electronic department and computing at that stage. Computers were then quite in the early days, and I spent nearly 10 years there. And I got, from there, I decided, I had a load of friends from university that were down in Devon. So I was looking for other opportunities, and I was getting fed up with the system of the examinations. There was people that in the first years that failed would have flown through the exams when I was leaving. So the system was going down. So in the end, I decided that I'd set up and go down. And after shopping around, I ended up moving to my first post office, which was in Oakhampton in Devon, which was a modified sub-post office, which is, i.e., an ex-Crown office. The person before it had been the manageress, and she had it, I think, for about a year, and it was still not completely out of into a proper retail environment, which I thought there was possibility in. And I also had fully trained Crown staff, and at that time we were still moving paper. I've never used the paper system. There was an inbuilt PC-based system called Capture that was run by the post office, and I used that to balance the post office. And
So just to put some dates on this.
That's 97.
So I think 7th of June 97, is that
Yes,
right?
yeah.
You took up your role as SPM at the Oakhampton branch. Oakhampton is in Devon,
Yes.
west of Exeter.
That's right, yes.
What kind of branch was the Oakhampton branch?
Well, it's what they called the modified sub-post office, because it was actually an ex-Crown office.
And so how many counters were there in the...
4. 4.
What type of community did it serve? What type
It's
of
a
place is
rural-
Oakhampton?
Basically, it's on the northern edge of Dartmoor. It's a very rural area. It's not that touristy. You see a few tourists, but it's basically you were the main office in quite a rural area with quite a lot of outlying post offices around. And during the period there, they started moving into having satellite post offices. And during that time, I ran 3 satellite post offices from Oakhampton, where we would go out twice a week to each of them. We went to Exbourne, Belston and Sticklepath. These are just villages that were, about probably 6-7 miles from there.
Okay. And so just to get the complete picture, I think you spent about 9 years at Oakhampton until the 26th of April,
It was a bit early.
2006.
That was when I took over the next branch.
Okay. And then you moved to Scotland,
Yes,
and you were the sub-postmaster of a branch in Aviemore, is that
that's
right?
right. Yes,
And that was from the beginning of 2006 until June 2017, is that
that's
right?
Yes,
When it was closed under the Network Transformation Programme,
yes.
and you moved to your current branch.
I would know we've been running the current branch for 9.5 years.
Oh, I see. So, winding back then to the beginning, before you took up your role as SPM at the Oakhampton branch, were you trained on the use of Horizon?
Horizon wasn't around when I was trained. I had 2 weeks. I think I ended up with 3 weeks with a trainer in branch. But I was quite lucky. I had 2 male clerks that had been fully trained by the post office.
When was that? Which year was that?
That was 1997 when I took over. They were there all the way through my time there.
No, I meant when was the training? It's my fault.
But the training was on the job.
Okay.
From the day we took over. It was 2 weeks from there. So basically, it was learn as you went along.
In your statement, you say, I had initial training on the introduction of Horizon. This was in 1999 and consisted of 2 days of off-site training at a hotel in Dartmoor.
Yes, that's right.
Do you remember that?
Yes.
What did the training cover?
It covered mainly transactions and basic operations such as putting rolls in printers and putting it in paper. They did a few transactions and they did do a little balance, but it was no way what you'd need for a busy office.
Why was it in no way what you'd need for a busy office?
Well, it's quite easy to see if you've done 5 transactions, if you've made a mistake in 5 transactions, but if you've got 4 people doing transactions, multiple transactions all day, you'll suddenly see that your total amount of work, if something goes wrong, what you've got to check is considerable. So it's a lot harder to find a mistake where there are more people using the system and multiple transactions.
Was, therefore, the training, in your view, inadequate?
For Horizon, yes.
Did it address what to do in the event of a shortfall, a discrepancy, or more broadly, troubleshooting?
No. Not in no way on that. I say, at that time, I felt the post office had suddenly come. One day there were a paper-based system, there was a computer system, but there was nobody that of the people that used the paper system knew anything about the computer system. I think you can term it like British Airways when they decided to move to Terminal 5. If you move them all across from that terminal to that one, it'll just work, thinking it. Of course, it didn't.
You say in your statement, when Horizon was introduced, I got the impression that Post Office was completely unprepared and lacked the practical knowledge to deal with a computerised accounting system. Yeah. Is that right?
I think that's true.
Now, of course, you at this stage had been a senior lecturer in, amongst other things, computing.
Yes.
For a decade.
Yes.
And you say elsewhere in your statement that you built computers for a hobby.
I did, yes.
And so by this stage, did you think you had a good understanding of the operation of computing systems?
Yes, yes.
And so what were the problems that you saw then at this initial stage?
Technically, it was how Horizon. Firstly, a person that was from the IERE came and made a beautiful plan of where sockets should go, telephone sockets should go there, your modem should go there, the computer unit should go in different places. But when they actually came to do it, it was thrown in. It was people that were working on to a quick time scale, and it's what parts they had at the time, and it got thrown in. I think all the sockets should have had switches on them. They didn't. One of the big failures, I think, on the installation was none of the sockets were filtered. So if you had any spikes, electrical spikes, it would immediately affect your computer, which caused lots of problems if you have thunderstorms and lightning.
You're there speaking about the correct configuration of the hardware, largely.
Yeah.
Did you ever get to see anything about system design or anything like that, or was that all sort of behind the curtain for you?
That was all that's behind the curtain to everybody. Yes.
So did you begin to use Horizon in 1999 then?
Yes. I say up till 1999, we never had any serious counter losses, as call them, on that. But during the period of the operation of the early version of Horizon, over the years I lost about £11,000 during that period. Anything big, because I was always of the opinion that if it was an amount more than a certain amount, it would be a case of sitting down there and having a really good search for the figure.
How soon after the beginning of the use of Horizon by you in that branch in 1999 did problems with shortfalls and balancing begin?
Quite soon. I can't remember just when. I think it was in the January of that I actually had all the counters changed because we're having so much problems with it. And Fujitsu took the 4 counters, and I actually went back to paper-based operation for, I think it was about 4 weeks, and then we moved back over onto back to Horizon.
So just taking this in stages, when problems with balances began to emerge and shortfalls were shown on the system, what did you do?
Well, you contact the helpline, and sometimes you didn't get any help from them.
What did they say?
Well, they say, well, it's the system. You must have put something in the system wrong, or something like this.
So what were you told to do?
Well, the case of, as you well aware by now, that on a Wednesday on your balance, to start trading the next day, you've got to turn over and you've got to declare your losses or your gains and accept them. They were basically saying, oh, it'll probably come back next week, which in some cases it did. You might be £200 down on a Wednesday night, but when you did a quick cash variance on the Thursday, that money would be back in your system. So it was one of those things. Again, you ring up. The thing is, if you altered anything in Horizon, because of how it was based, that physically the system was live in your office compared to the new system, they had mirror discs at other parts of the country, which you did it on your computer, then it went onto another system. So in other words, they've got a duplicate of the system, which of course led to timing faults. One of the things that when my computer was being done that 4 times, I actually managed to sign on two of our units with the same pass, and it just let me, which I was amazed at, why it let me actually sign on to the system with the same username and password. And now I had 2 units, I could use, but with the same. That would, of course, lead to problems as well.
So you told us overall that you paid in about £11,000 in total.
Yeah.
When did you start doing that?
It's from the start.
Why did you start doing that?
Well, you've got to basically, to fulfil your contract, you've got to cover any losses. And physically, I've been old school that even though they've changed to only balancing once a month, I've always balanced every week. Because if you've got a busy office, trying to find out what you did 3 weeks ago, when you've got this, you've got this loss, there's a lot of material you've got to go through to find it. So I've always tried to limit the amount of searching I would have to do by doing it weekly.
You said that as part of your contract you have to repay any losses or pay any losses. Did anyone advise you on the helpline that that's what you needed to do if the system was shown as a loss?
No, they always made. The post office always told you, the helpline always told you that you should always pay, cover your losses. You've got to put the money into the till, whatever. Because the fact is, if you don't, you then, inverted commas, you're false accounting. That's it. So it was always, to my mind, you always had to put the money in to make sure that you couldn't be prosecuted for false accounting.
You told us a moment ago about an occasion when the terminals were, the hardware was taken out of the branch. You went to a paper-based system for 4 weeks or so and then recommenced with new hardware. How did that come about?
Well, I complained to my BDM, Business Development Manager, and she could actually see some of the problems, and they're saying, well, this should not be happening. And with agreement, she took a level higher. They agreed to have an investigation, but I never was privy to what they actually found.
You say that you were experiencing problems with the Horizon system not being able to balance, and someone was sent to your branch to try to rectify the problem.
Yeah, I had.
What was the problem with Horizon? How did you know it was a problem with Horizon?
Because we're doing the same transactions as we were doing for the previous 2 to 3 years. We basically had no losses. The staff were the same, and they were, as I say, quite long in the tooth. They've been doing these things for years. I couldn't see why it should suddenly change. They should suddenly change when the computer system changed. So I argue that this should be something with the system.
So somebody came to the branch to try and rectify the problem.
Yes.
Who was that somebody? Not necessarily by name, but by job description or title.
There were two. I think probably Crown Office managers.
What did they do in the branch?
Well, they sat and looked at different transactions. They didn't actually do very much. Or never told me. I didn't get a report on what conclusions they came to.
You told us that the hardware was taken out. Why was the hardware taken out?
Because I think probably the thinking was that there was something not communicating or to each other or somewhere there was a problem. That's why. That's what I would presume that was the thing, because that is the active part, are the base units.
And when you went to the paper-based system for a month, was there any problem in balancing the books?
No.
When you went back to Horizon after the month, did the shortfall problem continue?
Yeah, on and off, but no gigantic amounts. I would have never, if I'd seen errors of more than probably a couple of £100, I would have stopped the whole thing and said, there's something wrong here. I'm not going to work any further with the system, because it escalates. As I've seen quite a few things, the amount can just go up, and it shouldn't do that. So I would have stopped there and said, let's really find out what's going on.
You speak in another part of your statement about Fujitsu having remote access.
Yes.
Was that at the this branch in Oakhampton, or was this
Yes,
after you
yes.
moved to Aviemore?
No, it was in Oakhampton.
Okay, and tell us the circumstances in which that came about.
Well, we were having some problem that I'd actually seen on the screen in front of me, and I was talking to the helpline, and I explained that, and next minute they connected to me to a person in Fujitsu.
So connected you on the telephone?
Yes, to Fujitsu, and he actually altered the figures that I was actually looking at while I was watching the screen.
So how do you know that he had remote access?
You could actually see what was the screen. Let's say there was a figure there of 5,000. That suddenly changed to say 7,000. So you could actually see that the number change while you were just watching the screen.
And was he talking you through this when he was doing this?
No, he just did this. When I tried to contact the gentleman again, I seemingly got in trouble for doing this, and I wasn't allowed to talk to him again.
Who did you get in trouble with?
No, he got in trouble.
Oh, he got in trouble?
Yeah.
How do you know he got in trouble?
Because they wouldn't let me talk to him ever again.
Can you remember roughly when this was, when Fujitsu had remote access to you?
It would be 2001, 2002, something like that.
And so they effectively altered an error?
Yeah, well, yes.
Is
Well,
that
I don't know whether it was error or what was it? Well, I saw them alter figures.
Was the problem that was fixed a shortfall problem, and what they did was to solve the shortfall problem?
Yes.
Can you remember what the error was?
No, I can't. Too long ago, I'm afraid.
Okay. Was that the only time, therefore, that you had access directly to a Fujitsu employee?
Other than when they came to change printers or something like that, yeah.
You say in your statement, I knew from other sub-postmasters that they were having similar problems with balancing on the Horizon system. How did you know that?
Well, I've been in the Federation of Subpostmasters. Again, they're just subpostmasters, but we have meetings, talking to one another, and things like that. I've been to conferences and talking to other people. It comes up in conversation all the time. It did.
You also say that the helpline told me that I was the only one and that the system was faultless.
Yes, I got told by various post office management when I was querying things that you're the only one. There's no problems with the system. It's all good to go.
You said there that various post office management, was that on the helpline or was that more
My BDM,
in branch?
In branch. I used to get a visit from my BDM every month and things like that.
And tell the chairman who the BDM is.
I can't remember her name.
No, what a BDM is.
Business Development Manager.
And in conversations with, was it a him?
It was a her, at that time it was a her.
It was a her. In conversations with her,
Yeah.
she said that you were the only one experiencing faults
Yes.
and that the Horizon system was problem-free or faultless.
Yes.
Was there ever any discussion amongst you as sub-postmasters that with you all experiencing issues with Horizon showing shortfalls, that something needed to be done?
Well, I think the fact is that everybody, it's this 300 years of trust of the post office, that the post office would be telling you the truth, and that it was you and not their system. That's one of the things I think they've always tried to provide, that it can't be them, it's got to be the sub postmaster.
I think you were on the National Federation committee when you were in Oakhampton, is that right?
Yeah, I was on the committee of the North Devon and Barnstaple branch.
Was any discussion ever had as to whether this issue ought to be raised at a higher level within the Post Office?
I think we've tried. I think in the Federation we tried to push it hard, push it up the ladder to the management. But I think the management of the Federation Subpostmaster believed quite probably not correctly that the system was as the Post Office described it. But I think it was due to their lack of known of telecommunication systems and computing that led them to just follow that because they had nowhere else to get information to, whether to question it or not.
You told us earlier that you estimate that in your branch you paid in some £11,000.
Yes.
Was that ever deducted from your remuneration, or was it always cheque payments or cash payments in?
Yes, it was always cheque or cash.
So there were no deductions ever made?
I never got to those amounts, thankfully.
And so how would you put those amounts in? Would you simply physically place cash in the safe?
Yes, it depends on the amount. It may be cash or cheque. Say we had a retail part of the business and I'd maybe move money on a Wednesday across from that to cover the loss. Or I would put in a cheque. I mean, sometimes when my cash flows thing, I'd put in credit card cheques to cover the shortfall.
And was this all in the Oakhampton branch, or did the same problem continue when you moved to Aviemore?
In Aviemore, the problem wasn't the same. It wasn't as large or anything like that. We had no gigantic losses. They were all quite small losses. But
Do you know why that was? Well, to start with, was the volume of money going through the branches different?
Yes, vastly different.
Was Aviemore a four-counter
yes.
branch, or?
Yeah, and that was when all your pensions were paid in cash. So I mean, you're going through so much cash. I mean, I think I had about 130 in Oakhampton. I think I had about 140 pensioners that were all being paid in, and children's benefits all being paid in cash. So the amount of money that was actually coming through the branch was considerable. Whereas now, when we moved up to Aviemore, I think it was still a busy branch in all sorts of things because it was touristy, plus all the locals and banking. That the money I brought in was that I paid out near enough covered itself. So in other words, I was cash rich. I was sending money back, whereas in Oakhampton I was being fed cash 3 times a week to pay for all the benefits.
When you moved to Aviemore in 2006, did you or your wife undergo any further or different training?
It was decided after the interview that when I was accepted for the branch that I had 9 years running a busy branch. I didn't need training, and my wife got sent to Dartford and she did a 2-week training course at Dartford.
And what was the training course about?
Basically transactions and sales.
Okay. Was it about the whole business of the post office, or was it only about the use of Horizon?
Well, the sales part was part of all different products, but it was basically on that. Again, there was she didn't have much information about balancing or what you do if things go wrong.
In the course of your time in Oakhampton, were you audited?
on a number of occasions.
You say 4 or 5 audits in your statement. Does that sound about right?
Yes.
And were these notified to you in advance, or were they surprised?
No, they were surprised. They'd arrive on your doorstep at about 8 o'clock on usually a Friday morning.
And out of those 4 or 5 audits, did auditors ever find a shortfall?
Only one major. I think there was only one major shortfall on one occasion. The others were quite maybe £100 or a couple of £100 either way.
And what happened on the occasion of the major shortfall?
Well, there was 2 auditors, and I think one was all for getting me suspended and in other words, sacking me. But the auditor, they also talked to my business development manager, and she supported and it was agreed to carry on from a view that on most of these, if they found an error, usually when I balanced on the following Wednesday, say they did it on a Friday, without putting any money in, the office would come to a near enough balance as you can.
So one of the auditors wanted you suspended, the other one was suggesting that you pay the money?
Yes.
And what did you do?
I think it came to the conclusion that it would be left. If I remember rightly, it would be left, and then they would come back and do an audit a week later, something like that.
And what happened when they came back?
It was all happily balanced.
And you hadn't done anything to make it balanced,
No.
so to speak. No.
And so, other than that, the audit showed up no substantial problems?
No. There was no problems. They just come in and go through everything.
Did you have audits when you moved to Aviemore?
Yes. I can't remember. You always get one after you've been in a new office after 6 months. But there was.
Were there any problems shown up to your knowledge, in the audits that were conducted in Aviemore?
Not that I can remember.
You say in your statement that on one occasion you were told that you were getting close to the threshold where I might be suspended due to the shortfalls that were arising. Was that back at Oakhampton?
Yes, that was back at Oakhampton, yes.
How did that make you feel, that you were being told that you might be suspended?
Well, it's a shock to your system. It means it's the end of your, inverted commas, life as you know it, because you're going to be put down as presumed guilty. Your local, in the community, are going to presume you've been thieving. So in other words, it's going to stain your character in that community.
That, in the event, didn't happen to you?
No, thankfully.
And so essentially you've paid in £11,000
Yes.
to balance the books through what you believe is a flaw in the Horizon system.
Correct.
Have you sought to recover that money?
No. No.
Have you heard of something called the Historical Shortfall Scheme?
I have heard of it. I don't. When I read the conditions of it, I don't think I was able to.
Why was that?
I can't remember now. Maybe it's something I should go back to and have a look at it. But
You didn't participate in the group litigation?
I did.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
So that would be the reason.
That would be the reason.
Yeah.
What happened in the group litigation, so far as you're concerned, by way of outcome?
I think it was great that it was proved that the Horizon system was faulty. I think it was despicable that Post Office did everything to win. That's it. But I think I received £600 or something like that of compensation, but that's far from what it should have been. I mean, physically, all the money from the settlement basically went to funding legal fees and the people that supported us in actually taking the case to court. But I was just pleased that it was shown that there was something wrong with the system, which everybody up to then had always denied in Post Office Limited.
And so the outcome for the group litigation, as far as you're concerned, never mind what it established, was that you got £600.
Yes.
And when you looked at the HSS, you realised you were excluded from it.
Yes.
Are you taking any active steps now to recover the money that the Post Office has taken from you?
No.
How does this saga make you feel?
Very sad. I'm really, I say, it really upsets me on how some of my fellow postmasters have been treated. It's very upsetting.
Now, they're the only questions that I want to ask you. Is there anything else that you would like to say?
Yes. So, Wynne, thank you for inviting me to give evidence. From my personal experience as a sub-postmaster and from my experience as a computer science lecturer, I would like your inquiry to find out who led the cover-up of the failures of the writing system and who thought and advised them that they could get away with it. Arising was a second-hand system from Irish Post, the Irish Post Office. What testing was done by IBM / Fujitsu before Arising was implemented in the UK. There have been numerous updates to both operating systems. What testing was done prior to downloading them to post office branches? Who set up and controlled the post office audit teams who repeatedly made statements like it's only happening to you? Who signed off on the branch installations, as it appears that some installations were just thrown in? I'm ashamed of the treatment of my fellow sub-postmasters by Post Office Limited, whose staff appeared to think that they were above the law and pursued individuals relentlessly. Assumed SPM postmasters were guilty, although no real evidence was provided. I remember my first audit when I was told by one of the post office auditors that I could not question their procedures. I think all persons involved with the rising failures hidden by Post Office Limited should be compensated now and not sometime in the future when there will be less of us around. Post Office have wrecked the Post Office brand, which has affected all our investments. I've been an agent for the Post Office for nearly 25 years and retire tomorrow. I've managed to make a living despite Post Office Limited and its policies and actions that have caused me a lot of anxiety and pain. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much
Thank
for
you.
coming and for giving evidence to me in person. And thank you for bringing your wife so I can meet you both.
Thank you.
So, can we take a short break just
course.
before Nancy
Yeah.
Chant is able to give evidence?
Certainly. Shall we depart?
I mean, it's probably not that kind of break.
Okay, fine. We'll just quietly sit here.
Thank you very much.
I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Good afternoon,
Good
Mrs. Chairman. As you know, my name is Catriona Hodge, and I ask questions on behalf of the inquiry. Please, could you state your full name?
It's Mrs. Nancy Chant.
You made a statement on the 6th of February of this year, is that right?
That's correct.
Do you have a copy of your statement in front of you?
I do, yes.
Could I ask you please to turn to the last page of your statement?
Too nervous to turn the page.
Well, I was having the same difficulty yesterday afternoon, so don't worry about it. It can happen to all of us.
Last page.
Can you see your signature there?
Yes.
Have you had a chance to read your statement again since it was first made?
Yes.
Are there any corrections you'd like to make to your statement?
A slight change at the end, point 59. Although what it says is the truth, it comes over.
Forgive me. And which sentence are you talking about?
My husband blamed me. It sounds like he blamed me, but what he was angry that I was paying for something that he believed had nothing to do with me. But it comes over there as if he thought I was guilty. Just the way it's, maybe this way I'm rereading it. But it never occurred to him that something went wrong somewhere else, something catastrophically went wrong in that office that I was in charge of. And he was just angry that I paid for it. He said he felt I should stand up and fight it, not pay it.
Thank you. Apart from that correction, is the content of your statement otherwise true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes.
I'd like to begin by asking you some questions about your long career in the post office. You first came to work in a post office branch upon leaving school, is that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
In which year was that?
Would have been 1973, 72, 73.
Where was the branch located?
In Line Cross Road in Pollock, Glasgow.
And what was the nature of your role in the branch at that time?
Saturday girl. No, I was just helping the back work. Like, I was very good. One thing I could do was count. So I was given all the paperwork, all the little gyro checks that were written and handwritten and then added up. And the dockets from all the pension books, piles of them. That was my job. Not so much serving the customers at that time, but because I could count, that was what I was doing.
Did you enjoy your work?
I loved it.
You were later appointed as the sub-postmistress of Crookford Post Office.
That's
is
correct,
that
yes.
right? Have I pronounced that correct?
That's it, yes.
And that's located in Glasgow.
Yes.
When did your appointment as a sub-postmistress commence?
In June 1986.
Do you remain in that role today?
I do.
If my maths is correct, you worked as a sub-postmistress for more than 10 years before the Horizon system was introduced.
Yes.
Is that right? Did you ever experience problems balancing your accounts before Horizon was brought in?
There was one, right at the very beginning, a discrepancy which I couldn't understand, and it happened while I was on holiday for the week. There was an investigation. I assumed it was an error that would come back. I was investigated. I had a woman that's worked for me to give me holiday relief because I was a single one-man band. We were both interviewed. We were asked if they could look through our bank accounts, which I let them. She wouldn't. And there was a time went by when, I was interviewed in George Square, but I never gave it much thought. I just thought it was an error and it'll turn up. Then somebody came out to me at the branch and said to me that was his job, to interrogate people for any errors. And in his opinion, I was telling the truth, or I was the best liar in Britain. And he looked me in the face and he said, "You're the only one that actually knows that you didn't take it, but it could only have been the person that worked for you. You need to do something about that." And I did. And then I single-handed for years without holidays, because she really just gave me holiday leave. But never, that was the only time.
Apart from that one incident, was your honesty and integrity ever called into question by the post office?
No.
What had attracted you to the role of a sub-postmistress?
My father was a postmaster at Line Cross Road. And I loved the work. I loved meeting people. I liked the variety of work. I think I liked being with people, talking to people, etc.
What experience had you had of working with computers before Horizon was
Nothing.
installed?
Absolutely nothing.
How did you feel about the introduction of this computer system?
Terrified. I actually considered packing it in. I considered leaving the post office. It just terrified me.
What training did you receive from the post office?
2 days in the hotel in Glasgow.
What did that training cover?
The workings of the Horizon, the keyboard, the touching the icons on the computer.
Were you taught how to balance on the system?
Yes, yeah.
Did you feel the training was sufficient to prepare you for using this new system?
I felt it probably should have been, but not for me. By that time, I had a young girl that came in to give me holiday relief, and I paid her to go in and do the 2 days of training because I thought she's going to cover for my holidays. She needs to know what she's doing. She was young with it and thought it was easy. And she just went to it like fish to water, great, and she helped me.
What were you told to do if you did experience problems balancing on the Horizon system?
Just to report it to Helpline.
Did you experience problems balancing after the system went live?
No,
So you
not
didn't-
immediately, not immediately.
Not immediately.
Not
When did you first start having?
2007. 2007.
Had anything changed around that time? And was there?
I never thought about it till I was sitting in here just now, but I just renovated the office. So everything was cleared out, totally emptied. All my cash was rammed back into the head office, and workmen came in. I refitted the entire post office, and then the engineers came and refitted 2 computers, 'cause I'd only had one before. And it was just it's the same computers that I had that had been stored and put back in place. But I never gave that a thought. Everything was fine until I had the shortage.
You've mentioned in your statement you had quite a significant shortfall in May of 2007.
Yes.
Is that right? Do you recall how much that was?
It was about 8,000. I can't give it exactly. It was around the 8,000 figure.
What inquiries did you make at the time to try and work out what had caused that shortfall?
I phoned the helpline that night to explain that I had a shortfall, and they said, that's okay, just, you have to declare it. I said, yes. That night, I printed out from the computer every single transaction that had taken place in the day. I checked the bins. I just looked everywhere, but what didn't add up for me, if you take the transactions, and in a simple way that I can explain it, if I locked up on the Wednesday night with £1,000, it was different amount, but in theory, with £1,000, and I could see the transactions that there was £1,000 of deposits and of withdrawals, £1,000 of withdrawals. I could see all that. So I ended up with £1,000 cash, but the system said I should have 10,000. It just didn't add up. And I don't know why that was, but the figures I was searching for, if I could lose £8,000 in a day, because that happened in a day, then there must be a transaction saying somebody deposited 8,000 and I threw it in the bin or something. But there was no deposits. Nothing corresponded to this shortage. There was no amount of cash coming in, so I just didn't see what could have happened.
When you reported the shortfall to the helpline, which you were required to do, did they assist you to get to the bottom of what had caused?
They said they were making inquiries.
Do you know whether they made any inquiries?
No idea.
In your statement, you say that you contacted your area manager about this shortfall. Is that right?
She contacted me. She contacted me to say that Chesterfield had been in touch with her and asked her, in her opinion, could I have taken the money? And she was telling me that she'd told them that I would not have done that, which was quite a relief, really, because all I could think of was, I've just renovated this shop, I've taken out a loan to do all this, and now money's disappeared. It just looked awful. So to hear somebody in the post office saying that they believed there was an error somewhere was comforting.
So as far as you know, the only inquiry the post office made was to ask your area manager whether she thought you had taken the money.
Yes.
Did the post office accept what your area manager told them, that you hadn't taken the money?
Yes. Yes. The only thing I ever heard was that I was responsible for the cash and that I would need to repay it back, and I came to an agreement of paying it back over several years.
So although you hadn't been shown anything to say that you'd taken it, you were still required to repay the money?
Yes.
How was that communicated to you?
I think I got it when there's a shortage and it's being held in suspense. It's held in a head office and they write to you to say you have an account that you owe so much money or whatever, but they asked me to pay it, and I contacted them and said, can I have time to pay it? And we came to the longest time they were willing to let me take. I can't remember how long it was years, but the longest time they were willing to give me to pay it back, that's what they then deducted from my remuneration each month.
So over the course of that time, they gradually deducted the amount of
Yes.
£7,000 or £8,000 from your salary as a sub-postmistress.
That's it.
And you let them do that because?
It was in my contract.
You experienced another shortfall in June 2010, is that right?
Yes.
On this occasion, I think you again made some inquiries yourself to get to the bottom of it. Can you describe those, please?
Again, I checked the transactions for the day. There were several small deposits. There was nothing of any large amount. And there was nothing that I could see printing it out, looking at it. I couldn't see anything, but I still had faith that errors happen and errors come back. Because that did happen in the old days. Before computers, there were human error. Additions were wrong and the errors would come back. And I still believe that could happen.
On this occasion, the shortfall was £3,000, is that right?
Yes.
Did you contact the helpline to report that shortfall?
Yes.
What did they tell you to do?
Just make sure that I declared the shortage when I balanced.
How was that shortfall resolved with the post office?
Again, I had the letter from the head office saying that there was a discrepancy in my office. I was responsible for it, and could I pay it? I phoned them up, and again arranged a year or two to pay it back.
When you were experiencing these shortfalls at the time, what did you believe was causing them?
I had no idea. I had no idea. At that time, I had a gentleman who had worked for the post office, and he was giving me holiday relief. Again, I was still working single-handed, and he would come in and give me holiday relief. And he would pop by one day, and I told him, for the shortage, he goes, that's not right. That's a computer error. And I said, do you think so? And he goes, yeah, it will turn up. And I kind of believed that too. So always believed it would come back. Always believed it would come back. I used to open up mail in the mornings that would be headed confidential and from the post office, and I'd go, yes, but it wasn't.
How much money do you think you paid in total to the post office?
About 11,000.
What effect did it have upon your business to be paying back these substantial sums of? Well, I say pay
The business
back,
carried
to be
on.
paying in these substantial.
The business
sums.
carried on, but I was the one that was working for very little money, because the remuneration was paying the rent, the rates, water rates, electricity, running costs, but what was left was for me, but it was going to the post office to pay back the shortage.
By way of deduction from your salary. How did this affect your personal finances at the time?
I just didn't have any spare money. I survived. That's it.
Did the financial pressures you were under affect your relationship with your husband?
Yes. Yes, he didn't like the fact that I was paying back something that I didn't have. He'd worked for British Rail, and he just thought they were such a great company to work for, and they looked after their staff, and he just couldn't believe the way that I was being treated by a big organisation. You know, so that, we gave up arguing over it. I thought, no, it's money, yeah, but we're living. Get on with it.
How is your well-being affected by the financial pressures that created for you?
Not so much the financial pressures, it was lack of myself, my own abilities. Every night, I cashed up every night, because I like to see I'm okay tonight. But as that computer churned over, my stomach would be in knots. My knees would start shaking. That still happens. It still happens.
In your statement, you say, I lost confidence in my abilities and began to question myself.
Yeah, I started double-checking everything I was doing, because there was a mistake here somewhere. I don't know what happened, but everything I was doing, I was double-checking.
Why did you decide to remain working for the post office when you'd experienced these significant problems using Horizon?
I didn't consider walking away. I loved working in the post office. In my mind, there's a couple of errors taking place. Horrible errors, terrible errors. But working where I was my life. You know, I know I was working, people wouldn't believe how little I was earning, but I loved the work. And I had a husband that supported me, so that's it.
How would you describe your current experience of using the Horizon system?
It's fine. But the weirdest thing is I find I know what I'm doing. I've even learned how to go online and check what they're paying me. Couldn't do that for years. Everything, I can understand how it's going. I can work it. I forgot what I was going to say there.
Have you experienced any significant shortfalls in recent years?
No.
Do you continue to experience small ones? Or
No.
balancing fine?
Yeah, everything's, yeah.
So, I think you were part of the group litigation, yeah?
I was, yes.
And Mr. Justice Fraser found that the current version of Horizon, as and when he was looking at it, was, to use the word that was bandied in that litigation, robust. Has that been your experience of the last few years of it?
Yes.
Okay.
You've just mentioned that you participated in the group litigation.
Yes.
Before that, you made a claim through the mediation scheme, is that right?
No.
You hadn't?
No.
As a result of the group litigation, did you receive any compensation?
I received about £2,000.
Do you feel that the post office has learnt from the failings that came to light in the course of the group litigation from your experience as a current sub-postmistress?
I don't know. It's not something I really discussed with the post office. It's really not something I've discussed with them.
In terms of your day-to-day interactions, though, with those that your managers, the helpline, do you feel that those experiences have improved?
There is an improvement in that I now have an area manager. When I first took over the post office, you had an area manager. You felt you were on a one-to-one. You felt you could phone her up to say whatever was going wrong. There was one occasion when I'd balanced, and it was bad. I think it was maybe, in these days, £1,000. And I phoned her up, and she goes, it'll be there. And it was crazy, because the next day, at the very back of the safe, it was sitting at the back of the safe. I'd missed it when I'd been doing my reconciliations that night, just a bag at the back. But you had that personal touch. Once the computer came in, then you had a helpline. And the helpline were impersonal. It was just totally different. And over the last 4-5 years, they've reintroduced a area manager. and it's back to being a bit more personal. It's nicer.
I've no further questions that I'd like to ask you. Is there anything that you'd like to say to the chair?
Yes, thank you. If I can hold the paper without shaking. So I find it difficult to describe to you what impact this shortfall has had on me and my family. But thank you for giving me the opportunity to give evidence to you. I always knew that I was responsible for any shortfalls in my office, and as such, accepted responsibility. I was devastated when in 2007 I had a large shortfall of about 8,000. Pure fear and panic flooded through me. I contacted the helpline to report the loss and spent days poring over transactions for that day. Nothing made sense. My son spent the day studying the CCTV footage in my shop, and he couldn't see anything that gave him any clue. I lost a lot of confidence and became very nervous when cashing up. A few years later, another shortfall had me doubting myself. Now that I've learned that the post office, while asking me to pay for these shortfalls, knew that the system was unreliable, I feel betrayed and very angry. Deductions were made from my remuneration for a few years, leaving me working 50 hours a week with very little to show for it. While I paid rent and bills for the property, which took the rest of the cash. It was very difficult with my husband at that time, as he could not understand why I had to pay for something that I had not taken. He wanted me to refuse to pay it and fight. He wanted me to go to court and fight it. I tried to explain to him that there's nothing I could do. It was in my contract to pay shortfalls. He was raging. The job I had loved was now causing me great anxiety and great anxiety at work and stress at home. In the beginning, I convinced myself an error had taken place and it would be found and the losses would be rectified. To this day, I'm still nervous when cashing up at night and my stomach flips. I would like to say to everyone, I would like to see everyone get their money back that they had to pay back to the post office. I know what I lived through was scary, but my heart goes out to those who were prosecuted. I would like to see them receive compensation, although no amount of money will ever compensate for what these people had to live through. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Mrs. Chant, for your description of the past, but also your description of the present. And if I may, I'm going to use the bits of evidence that you gave about the present as a vehicle to say that I've heard comparatively few people talk about the present so far. And in due course, I would like sub-postmasters to come forward and tell me about the present, because part of my role is not just to look at the past, but to look at the present and the future. So thank you for sharing that part of your evidence with me, and thank you generally.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That concludes our all evidence.
It does, and I'll give Mr. Enright a minute or two to talk to his client, and then we'll have him in the hot seat to read a few summaries and then conclude the proceedings.
Thank you.
So when you've asked me to begin with the final Scottish...
if you would, please, yeah.
And to read 4 others, and
Yeah.
hopefully you have them in order.
Well, I deliberately annoyed my team, Mr. Enright, by refusing to have them in order because I like moving my papers around every now and then. That's just to introduce a little lightheartedness into what is obviously a very serious occasion.
The order I was hoping to address is Mr. Brian Macaulay,
Yeah.
Mrs. Joanne George,
Yeah.
Ms. Pauline Coyle,
Yeah.
anonymised witness 0301,
03301. Yeah.
and Mr. Peter Holloway.
to move backwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. With your permission.
Yeah.
Sir, you and your panel, of course, have read with care the full witness statements of the individuals whose summaries I will be reading to you now. I'd like to begin with Mr. Brian Macaulay, who is a sub-postmaster of 2 post office branches in Scotland. He operated his main branch, the Kilmuirs Post Office, from around September 2014 to December 2016 with his sons, and he operated an outreach branch in Kilmarnock from around 2015 to December 2016. Brian attended a couple of days training on the Horizon system before starting work at the branch. The training was run at the Post Office Training Centre here in Glasgow. Brian says a trainer also attended the branch on the first day he opened to show him how to complete the daily and monthly balances. Brian described this as a shambles. During the balance, there was a shortfall, and the trainer did not stay to help him work out where the balance had gone wrong. Brian says the training was completely inadequate. He did not feel as though it prepared him to run a post office. Brian says he paid in excess of £20,000 to the post office in relation to shortfalls. He would often telephone the helpline when shortfalls arose and trace back through transactions to see if he could find any obvious mistakes. When he could not find any errors, he would opt to settle the shortfall by cash on the Horizon system. In 2016, Brian experienced 2 large shortfalls. The first amounted to some £39,765.05, which Brian did not repay. He then experienced another shortfall later on in 2016 that amounted to £107,618.89. Brian received a letter from the post office demanding repayment of this sum, but was unaware of how or where this alleged shortfall came from and whether it related to the previous £39,765 shortfall. Following an audit, Brian was contacted by his contracts manager, who confirmed that they had found an alleged shortfall and that his appointment was suspended. As a result, Brian could no longer work in the branch until the post office had concluded their investigations. Brian says, "I was absolutely shattered by my suspension because I had no idea what the problems were and how these shortfalls kept occurring." Brian's appointment was eventually terminated in December 2016. After losing the post office, he tried to keep his retail business running, but due to a huge drop in footfall and rumours that were circulating about him, Brian's retail business was no longer sustainable. He had no option but to close. Brian says he was under a huge amount of pressure as a result of the actions of the post office, and his mental health was seriously impacted, as well as his relationships. Brian says the consequences of being held responsible for the shortfalls were that I lost my business, my home, my family. I was out of a job, and my kids were also out of a job. My entire life was falling apart as a result of the actions of the post office. I considered ending it all by taking my own life. I had nothing to live for anymore. The post office are the most evil people I know. Sir, Mrs. Joanne George was the sub-postmistress of the Bastchurch Post Office in Newtown from March 2013 to October 2016. Mrs. George and her husband ran a hardware store and expanded the business to include a post office branch. Joanne attended an 8-day Horizon training course prior to the branch opening. She found the training rushed. 3 post office trainers came into her branch to shadow her. Joanne says this was not helpful, as the post office trainers chatted amongst themselves. Joanne says she would contact the helpline 2 to 3 times a week. She found them rude and unhelpful. Their advice was always to pay the shortfalls. Joanne estimates that in total she paid in the region of £12,000 over the years in shortfalls. Joanne was not suspended, but instead accepted closure under the Network Transformation Scheme. The constant stress of the shortfalls and lack of support from the post office led Joanne to feeling as though she had no other option but to accept closure. At the final audit before the Network Transformation Scheme, a £450 shortfall was discovered. Mrs. George disputed this, but the post office warned her that she would not receive anything if she did not pay the shortfall. Joanne felt she was being blackmailed. Joanne was ordered by the post office to hand over all her paperwork and to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Joanne's contract was then terminated. Mrs. George blames the post office for the loss of her business. It was valued at £480,000, but Joanne was told she must accept the post office offer of £42,000 and was prevented from selling her business. Joanne says her mental and physical health declined. Joanne became suspicious of family members and even asked her son if he had stolen the money. Joanne attempted suicide. Mrs. George and her husband now live in a mobile home. She has not worked since her business closed, as she finds it very hard to trust anyone. Joanne says, "My life has been forever changed by the actions of the post office. I was leading a happy family life and running a successful business. I was forced out and made to sell my business at a loss. It has felt as though we are on a merry-go-round with no end. All I hope is that we can finally put the situation behind us and have some closure." Sir Pauline Coyle is the current Subpostmaster at Bonby Post Office in Brigg, North Lincolnshire. She and her husband consider that they were thrown in at the deep end with the Horizon system. She had to be trained by her husband initially, who was unsure of the system. She describes this as the blind leading the blind. Subsequent on-site training was inadequate. It soon became clear that there were problems with the Horizon system. Ms. Coyle was told by the helpline that the problems were her fault and payments were deducted from her wages. Pauline requested an audit in 2014 and a shortfall of over £1,600 was identified in relation to stocks of stamps which she had never received. Pauline says, "I was very stressed, very worried, but also incredibly angry. It was the injustice of having someone come into my business and tell me I owed a huge amount of money and implied that I had been stealing. The auditor told Miss Coyle that he knew that she and her husband had not stolen anything, but that she was liable anyway. Pauline escalated the matter and the post office agreed to write off the stamps against monies which the post office owed to the Coyles. Pauline says, "My retirement is being delayed and we are forced to live somewhere we do not want to live and being forced to do a job that we do not want to do." Pauline says that the problems created distrust in her marriage and she became distressed and frustrated. She's been unable to sell her post office for some 8 years now and her retirement plans have been frustrated. Pauline says, "I also feel very strongly that sub-postmasters should be put back in the position that they should have been in if the shambolic operation of the post office had been better and the scandal better managed." The anonymous witness 0301 was a sub-postmaster from July 2000 to May 2016. The witness sold his property abroad. This enabled him to buy a post office and a home in the UK. The witness thought he would run the post office until his retirement and he would be able to retire early. The training and the trainers were inadequate. The witness would be up to 1 a.m. on a Wednesday to get the figure on the Horizon system to balance. He called the helpline every week, sometimes more than 5 times in one day, regarding shortfalls or balancing. The helpline would actually make the loss double by giving the witness the wrong information. The shortfall amounts varied, but continued over the 16 years of the witness's tenure. The post office would not let the witness pay the shortfalls back by deducting from his salary, so the witness paid for those shortfalls with his credit card. By this time, the witness was behind on his gas and electricity bills and behind on his taxes. The shortfalls were revealed on balance nights. The witness spent hours looking at rolls of paper trying to find the cause of the shortfalls. The witness would be up as late as 4 a.m. looking for discrepancies. But he could not find the shortfalls. He felt that the system was designed so that you could not find them. The witness feared that his contract would be terminated by the post office every Thursday morning. He would always look through the window on a Thursday to see if anyone was there following a balance on a Wednesday. The post office had told him that if he did not pay back the shortfalls, he could be subject to prosecution. The witness estimates that he could well have repaid shortfalls in excess of £25,000. Even today, the witness has debts that he is still paying off and feels that the emotional scars on his wife and family will never heal. The witness and his wife's reputation was damaged in the community. They were no longer asked to open the church gala or organise pensioners' days. Their shop window was smashed. They did not feel safe in their own home. The witness's parents suffered as they heard people at church running them down and saying, "There's no smoke without fire." The witness was party to the group litigation, which the witness feels turned out to be a joke. The witness feels that he and his wife should have been comfortably retired by now. However, they are not. As the witness says, all because 20 years or so ago we decided to buy a lifestyle business in a quiet village so our children would have a good future away from the fast dog-eat-dog life, and we would be with our family. The witness concludes, "I would like for it to be over with. I would like to know where all the money went. We are bitter, all because of a crappy computer system, but most of all by the mistreatment and lies of the unscrupulous Post Office Limited management." And then finally, sir, Mr. Peter Holloway, who was the Subpostmaster of the Wareham Post Office in Dorset from September 2001 until April 2009. The Post Office had 3 satellite offices for which he was responsible. Mr. Holloway was also the temporary Subpostmaster of the Post Office on King Street in Swanage from 2005 until 2006. Mr. Holloway experienced shortfalls on the Horizon system of approximately £28,000 at his branches. The Post Office responded to these shortfalls by claiming that Mr. Holloway's staff were stealing from him. Due to this, Mr. Holloway began to mistrust his staff, and as a result, he implemented measures and checks. This caused bad feelings amongst his staff and created an uncomfortable working environment, which resulted in the departure of some of his employees. Despite having acknowledged that Mr. Holloway was the best sub-postmaster in the area, the Post Office conducted an audit and threatened to prosecute Mr. Holloway and then terminated his contract. Mr. Holloway has suffered significant financial loss as a consequence of the actions of the Post Office. He went from being a successful and reputable businessman to having to undertake low-pay work. For example, working 66 hours per week on jobs such as delivering vegetables. Mr. Holloway has suffered significant stigma in the community. He had to resign as chair of the local Chamber of Commerce. Mr. Holloway says, "When my wife and I walked down the street, former friends and acquaintances would turn their backs on us and cross the street to avoid us. When I got work doing food deliveries, one of the company's customers asked them to dismiss me, as they said I was a criminal. My employer refused, but the customer cancelled their order and refused to let me near their home." Mr. Holloway and his wife have now left their local area to escape that stigma, for which the Post Office is responsible. Mr. Holloway says, "The Post Office's lack of support or sympathy for sub-postmasters was unbelievable. and their fraudulent motives have emerged are unforgivable. To behave as they did to other human beings and to destroy and ruin their lives is inhumane. Post Office Limited and their senior managers and staff do not deserve to survive this scandal. The individuals should feel the full force of the law for knowingly making innocent people suffer. Thank you, sir.
That brings us to an end of our evidence gathering on human impact in Scotland. As I expected it would, it has provided us with further important insights into the damage caused by Horizon and decisions taken in relation to it. I'm very grateful to all of those who have participated in these hearings over the last day and a half, and I can now announce that we are on the last lap, so to speak, of our human impact hearings, but we're going to Belfast next week to complete our tour around the United Kingdom, and then that will see the end of this phase of the inquiry. So I'm grateful to the people in Scotland who have assisted me. I should give a plug to my team. They have made this run smoothly, so thank you to them. And although in many ways this is a sad occasion because we're dealing with sad events, I have to say I've been very pleased to come to Scotland. So thank you all very much.